A leak just revealed Harley's boldest move yet, and riders are calling it betrayal. One canceled bike has sparked outrage across dealerships, factories, and even Capitol Hill. Could this be the decision that breaks America's most iconic motorcycle brand? Stay tuned until the end. It might change how you see Harley forever. What's happening? This wasn't a corporate press release. It was a knife in the back. The Pan America 1250 was more than a motorcycle. It was Harley's bold declaration that they could compete in the rapidly growing adventure touring market, a space dominated by BMW's GS line and other European and Japanese contenders. Riders had placed their hopes in it. Many believed it would finally prove that Harley could innovate without abandoning its heritage. But instead of a triumphant rollout or a heartfelt announcement, the news of its cancellation arrived in the darkest way possible, through a leak. The leak came from an internal document meant for top leadership only, outlining the company's 5-year roadmap. Buried in its technical jargon was a single devastating line. Harley would be discontinuing the Pan America 1250 project. No tribute, no acknowledgement, no thank you to the fans who had been waiting. Just a quiet burial, hidden in a confidential slide deck. For riders who had followed the Pan America story since its dramatic unveiling, the revelation was shocking. This was not just a canceled product, it was a betrayal of trust. Riders had invested dreams, savings, and years of anticipation. Harley did not merely scrap a bike, they scrapped a promise. But the shock was not confined to fans. Inside showrooms across the country, the people whose livelihoods depended on Harleys felt the tremor even more. And that is where the anger began to take shape. What started as stunned silence among riders quickly turned into open defiance from the dealerships. Dealers didn't cry, they revolted. Within hours, the people selling Harleys started refusing them. Dealers across the Midwest, the South, and even major coastal cities reported a flood of calls from disappointed customers. Pre-orders were canceled, deposits were pulled back. Showrooms that had been preparing for the Pan America's next iteration suddenly faced rows of empty spaces where excitement should have been. Dealers are more than middlemen. They are the lifeblood of Harley's presence in America. For decades, local shops served as gathering places for riders, community hubs as much as sales outlets. When the Pan America 1250 cancellation leaked, dealers felt betrayed not only as business operators, but as guardians of Harley's culture. They had sold the dream of a new frontier Harley. Now they had to explain why the dream had been killed in silence. One dealer in Wisconsin said bluntly, "We built marketing campaigns around this machine. We promised riders it was Harley's future. Now they are calling us liars." Another dealer in Texas admitted losing nearly 20 pre-orders in a single day. The anger was not just financial, it was personal. They had stuck their reputations on a motorcycle that Harley abandoned without warning. Dealers began forwarding their frustrations to regional reps, demanding answers. Some refused to participate in upcoming promotional campaigns. A few even posted cryptic messages on social media hinting at their disillusionment. Harley's decision, intended to streamline its lineup, had ignited a grassroots rebellion within its own retail backbone. Yet while dealers seethed on the ground, the real calculations behind the cancellation were being made in distant boardrooms. If you've ever ridden a Harley or even dreamed of owning one, hit that like button right now, because your voice matters here. And drop a comment. Do you think canceling this bike was a bold move or the biggest mistake Harley ever made? Your perspective is fuel for this conversation. The board's cold logic. The spreadsheet said yes, the riders said no. Harley's leadership under Chief Executive Jochen Zeitz had been following a strategy built not on loyalty but on margins. Zeitz, who had once revived Puma with a focus on premium branding, brought the same philosophy to Milwaukee. His goal was not to sell the most bikes, but to sell the most profitable ones. That meant concentrating on high-margin touring machines and electric models rather than lower-margin adventure bikes. To the board, the Pan America 1250 was expendable. Market research suggested that although adventure bikes were growing, the segment was crowded and brutally competitive. Competing against BMW, Honda, and Yamaha required massive investment, uncertain returns, and thin profits. In contrast, Harley's heavyweight cruisers and touring bikes still delivered fat margins from loyal buyers. The cold logic was simple: cut what did not maximize profit. But what looked efficient on a spreadsheet was devastating to brand identity. By retreating from adventure, Harley signaled it was unwilling to compete in one of the most dynamic corners of motorcycling. Worse, the decision clashed with the very marketing that had accompanied the Pan America's launch. Riders had been told Harley was stepping boldly into the future. Now the board had quietly pulled the plug. In corporate language, it was called margin-aligned brand evolution. In plain language, it meant turning away from innovation. And outside the boardroom, the fallout reached the very workers whose hands had built Harley's legend. Don't wait on Harley to get it right. Equip yourself with the riding essentials trusted by real bikers. Check out the links below in the description. From factory floor to Capitol floor. For the first time in decades, Harley's workers in Washington were on the same side. The leaked cancellation memo spread quickly through factory floors in Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. Workers who had proudly assembled Harleys for years read that their company was walking away from one of its most promising models. The mood shifted from pride to rage. Union leaders responded almost immediately. To them, this was not just about a bike, it was about job security and respect. Canceling the Pan America 1250 suggested not only a strategic retreat, but also the possibility of more production cuts down the road. Rumors spread that resources were being shifted overseas to facilities in Thailand. For workers who had staked their lives on the promise of American steel, this was betrayal in its rawest form. Politicians seized the moment. Representatives from Wisconsin called press conferences condemning Harley's direction. Senators from Pennsylvania warned of broader consequences for American manufacturing. The cancellation of a single model became a lightning rod for debates about economic nationalism, corporate responsibility, and the survival of blue-collar jobs. Workers walked out of factories in silent protest. Riders joined them in solidarity, holding banners that read, "Keep it in America." The cancellation of one motorcycle had united groups that rarely aligned, workers, riders, and lawmakers, all speaking with one voice of betrayal. As protests rattled the factory gates, Harley's rivals saw an opening too tempting to ignore. Rivals smelled blood. The moment Harley pulled back, rivals hit the throttle. Indian Motorcycles, Harley's fiercest domestic competitor, wasted no time. Within weeks of the Pan America cancellation, Indian unveiled an updated Scout built to appeal directly to the riders Harley had abandoned. The ad campaign was blunt, almost taunting. Still loud, still American, still here. Sales surged by nearly 30% in just one quarter. Across the Atlantic, BMW doubled down on its flagship GS adventure bikes, emphasizing the very qualities Harley had once promised in the Pan America: reliability, endurance, and a global support network. Riders who might have taken a gamble on Harley's experiment instead chose BMW's proven legacy. Honda and Yamaha also seized the moment, pushing stripped-down, affordable adventure bikes that spoke directly to younger, budget-conscious buyers. Market analysts noted that Harley's retreat created a vacuum in a segment growing faster than any other in motorcycling. By 2024, adventure bikes accounted for nearly 1 in 5 new motorcycle sales worldwide. Pulling out of that race was more than a mistake. It was strategic surrender. Harley had given its competitors the perfect opening and they were flooding through it. While competitors celebrated, Harley's leadership was busy tearing itself apart from within. Fire in the boardroom. Harley wasn't just fighting rivals, it was fighting itself. Inside the headquarters in Milwaukee, tension boiled between executives, board members, and managers who had championed the Pan America project. Leaked emails revealed furious debates in which senior staff accused leadership of betraying the company's commitment to innovation. Some argued that without a competitive adventure model, Harley risked alienating a generation of riders. Others defended the decision as necessary to keep the company solvent. The conflict soon turned personal. Reports circulated of late-night shouting matches between directors, with accusations of incompetence and even disloyalty. Jochen Seitz, once hailed as a visionary, now faced growing dissent from his own lieutenants. A faction of the board quietly reached out to outside consultants to explore alternative strategies, a move seen by insiders as a prelude to a potential leadership shakeup. At the same time, staff morale collapsed. Engineers who had spent years refining the Pan America design felt gutted. Several left for rival firms, taking their expertise with them. Harley was not only losing products, it was bleeding talent. What had begun as a cold strategic decision to maximize margins was spiraling into a full-blown leadership crisis. The boardroom battle soon spilled onto Main Street, where dealerships faced the consequences. Dealer exodus in empty towns. When a Harley shop closes, the whole town loses its thunder. In small communities across the Midwest and South, dealerships were more than sales outlets, they were local institutions. Saturday gatherings, charity rides, and annual rallies often centered on the Harley showroom. When the Pan America was canceled, many dealers who had staked their future on its success faced devastating losses. Some could not survive the blow. In Ohio, a dealership that had been open for nearly 50 years shut its doors after a steep decline in sales. The closure didn't just cost jobs inside the shop, it rippled outward. The diner across the street lost nearly a third of its weekend business. A nearby mechanic laid off 2 employees. Local hotels saw a drop in bookings during what should have been rally season. The disappearance of Harley in these towns wasn't just economic, it was cultural. Dealers who remained open faced a shrinking customer base and growing resentment. Many began quietly exploring partnerships with other brands, adding Indian or Japanese models to their floors to offset Harley's decline. What once felt like an unbreakable network of loyalty now looked like a chain rusting link by link. As communities struggled, Wall Street delivered its own brutal verdict on Harley's future. Wall Street pulled the brake. The ticker told the truth. Harley's legend was bleeding out in real time. In the months following the Pan America cancellation, Harley-Davidson's stock price slid relentlessly. Analysts downgraded the company from stable to watch list risk. By the end of 2024, shares had dropped by more than 40% from their peak. Institutional investors, once confident in Harley as a reliable legacy brand, began quietly exiting. Pension funds flagged the company as too volatile. Suppliers raised concerns about contracts, citing uncertainty about Harley's long-term viability. Credit agencies downgraded Harley's debt rating, making future borrowing more expensive and expansion plans nearly impossible. Behind these numbers was a deeper erosion of confidence. Wall Street had tolerated Harley's premium pivot when it looked like a bold reinvention. But when the pivot resulted in canceled models, angry dealers, and declining cultural relevance, investors saw not reinvention, but rot. The Pan America's cancellation symbolized a brand moving backward while its competitors surged ahead. And the verdict from the market was unmistakable. Harley's glory days were not just in question, they were in free fall. Yet the financial slide was only the surface. The deeper wound was cultural, and it cut far worse. The roar went silent. For the first time in 70 years, the roar was gone. That deep V-twin thunder, the sound that once echoed down highways and across small-town rallies, had always been more than noise. It was a heartbeat. It was rebellion wrapped in steel. But when Harley canceled the Pan America 1250 and shifted its focus, something fundamental vanished. Writers said it felt like the soul of the brand had been switched off, as if the soundtrack of their lives had suddenly gone silent. Clubs that had built their identity around Harley's distinct sound began holding what they called last roar rides, gatherings to celebrate a past they feared was slipping away. Old-timers who had ridden Harley since the 1970s described the silence as worse than any mechanical failure. A dead engine can be fixed. A lost identity cannot. The Pan America had represented the possibility of Harley carrying that roar into new territory. Without it, riders were left to wonder if the noise would only exist in memory. The loss wasn't mechanical, it was cultural. Without the roar, Harley was no longer a signal of belonging, no longer a rite of passage passed down from father to son or shared among lifelong friends. It became just another brand, stripped of its thunder. Into that void of silence, Harley tried to spark a new future and ignited the wrong fire. Livewire lit the wrong fire. Harley didn't just lose the sound, it lost its soul. The Livewire project, spun off into its own company, was meant to catapult Harley into the future. An electric motorcycle carrying the Harley badge should have been revolutionary, a way to lead instead of follow, but for many loyal riders, the Livewire was not a symbol of progress. It was a betrayal. The price tag alone alienated younger buyers, with the machine launching at nearly $30,000. Instead of attracting new riders, it reinforced Harley's image as overpriced and out of touch. Traditional riders mocked the bike's silence, calling it a laptop on wheels. To them, the lack of rumble meant the lack of everything that made Harley a Harley. It wasn't just the absence of noise, it was the absence of customization, ritual, and grit. Even investors struggled to understand the decision to spin Livewire into a separate brand through a complicated financial deal. What was meant to be the future quickly looked like an orphan. Dealerships didn't know how to sell it, and customers didn't know why they should buy it. Instead of bridging Harley's past and future, the Livewire deepened the divide. As the company doubled down on a future no one asked for, riders decided to fight back on their own terms. Riders rebelled, not retreated. They didn't buy new bikes, they built a rebellion. In garages, on forums, and across social media, riders organized boycotts, protests, and symbolic funerals for the bikes Harley had abandoned. Facebook groups like Save the Sportster exploded in membership, while TikTok influencers racked up millions of views mocking Harley's corporate pivots. Instead of fading into silence, riders used the tools of the digital age to make their fury impossible to ignore. Some riders staged protest rides, circling dealerships with banners that read, "Bring back the real Harley." Others filmed themselves cutting up Harley merchandise or mailing their Harley Owners Group memberships back to headquarters. Independent mechanics launched small businesses dedicated to keeping discontinued models alive, creating underground networks of parts, modifications, and loyalty that bypassed the official Harley ecosystem entirely. The rebellion was more than symbolic. It sent a clear signal. Riders would not passively accept the death of their culture. They were reclaiming their brand from the very company that had abandoned them. What began as grief turned into mobilization, a movement that forced even mainstream media to cover the story. What began as rebellion in garages soon showed its scars in the small towns that once thrived on Harley's presence. Main streets felt the shockwaves. When Harley leaves, diners, mechanics, and main streets bleed. Across America, the closing of Harley dealerships wasn't just a retail shift, it was a cultural and economic earthquake. These dealerships had been more than sales rooms. They were gathering places, local anchors that kept small businesses alive. In one Pennsylvania town, the shuttering of a dealership after 5 decades left a hole that no other business could fill. The coffee shop next door lost its morning crowd. The diner saw weekend revenue drop by nearly 1/3. A barber who had cut hair for riders traveling through town said he lost so many customers he had to close his shop. What vanished was not just commerce, but community identity. The disappearance of Harley dealerships stripped towns of more than commerce. It erased tradition. Weekend rallies, charity rides, and biker festivals vanished overnight, taking with them the sense of belonging that had bound generations. Without Harley, many communities felt as though their cultural heartbeat had been silenced along with the engines. Without local dealerships, new riders had no place to experience Harley firsthand. Warranty work became a hassle. Demo rides disappeared, and rallies lost their central hub. The very culture that made Harley powerful in America was dissolving one small town at a time. It was no longer just about canceled bikes or angry riders. It was about hollowed-out communities. From those hollowed-out main streets, a larger truth emerged. If Harley could stumble, so could anyone. If Harley can fall, who's next? Harley was supposed to be untouchable. So what happens when it isn't? For over a century, the name carried a weight that few other brands could match. It stood as a cultural fortress, a symbol of American resilience and freedom on 2 wheels. But the collapse of confidence following the Pan America's cancellation revealed something sobering. Even the most iconic legacies can crumble if they misread their moment. This was not just a story about one company, it was a case study, a warning light flashing for every legacy brand that believes its past is enough to guarantee its future. Companies and industries as varied as automobiles, fashion, and consumer electronics are all vulnerable. When a brand takes loyalty for granted while chasing margins, it risks alienating the very people who made it powerful. Legacy is a double-edged sword. The same history that builds loyalty can become a weight when leaders mistake nostalgia for strategy. Harley proved that icons are not immune. When identity ossifies instead of evolving, even giants can stumble. And once they do, competitors and critics waste no time rushing in. Analysts have begun drawing comparisons to other industries. Just as Kodak fell by ignoring digital photography and Nokia stumbled by underestimating smartphones, Harley's refusal to balance heritage with innovation showed how quickly identity can turn into irrelevance. The fall of a motorcycle giant is not a fluke. It is a blueprint for what happens when corporate strategy forgets culture. Other brands wasted no time rewriting the story Harley abandoned. Competitors rewrite the playbook. Harley's silence became everyone else's opening act. Indian Motorcycles launched bold campaigns positioning itself as the true inheritor of American motorcycle culture. Their message was clear. While Harley outsourced and canceled, Indian stayed loud, stayed visible, and stayed American. The impact was immediate. Sales surged by double digits, and Indian dealerships reported record levels of new riders switching allegiances. BMW moved strategically as well, emphasizing its GS Adventure line as the standard-bearer for durability and exploration. Every marketing campaign reinforced the idea that BMW was offering what Harley had promised but failed to deliver. Meanwhile, Honda and Yamaha pushed aggressively into affordability, targeting younger riders with lightweight, stylish machines that undercut Harley on price while outpacing it in reliability. Each competitor framed Harley's silence to their advantage. Indian wrapped itself in patriotism, BMW leaned on engineering prestige, and Honda emphasized accessibility. Together, they painted a picture Harley could no longer claim: authentic, reliable, and forward-looking. The result was devastating. Riders didn't just compare products, they compared values, and Harley lost. Even Royal Enfield, long considered a niche player, used Harley's stumble to its advantage. It rolled out mid-weight cruisers that blended retro charm with modern engineering, appealing directly to riders who once saw Harley as the only authentic choice. The message across the globe was consistent. Harley's retreat left a void, and everyone else was racing to fill it. As global competitors advanced, American politicians turned the fallout into a rallying cry. From bike to ballot box. Harley's biggest mistake wasn't canceling a bike, it was handing politicians a weapon. The decision to shift production overseas while abandoning a model tied to American pride gave lawmakers an easy target. Within weeks, campaign ads featured shuttered dealerships and empty factory gates as symbols of corporate betrayal. A congresswoman from Milwaukee stood in front of a closed plant and declared, "Harley turned its back on the workers who built it." That clip went viral across social platforms. In Pennsylvania and Ohio, candidates from both parties seized the issue. Some called for tariffs on motorcycles built overseas. Others demanded investigations into Harley's tax incentives and subsidies. Governors threatened to withdraw support for any company that moved jobs offshore while still marketing itself as a patriotic brand. Politicians didn't need to invent the narrative, it was handed to them. A canceled bike, an offshore factory, and angry workers created a perfect storm for campaign speeches. Harley became shorthand for broken promises, a ready-made symbol of what happens when corporations chase global profits and abandon the people who built them. What might have been a niche corporate controversy ballooned into a national debate about economic nationalism. The Pan America's cancellation became shorthand for what happens when companies chase margins at the expense of workers. Harley was no longer just a motorcycle brand. It was a cautionary tale wielded in speeches, debates, and televised ads. Caught between campaign slogans and shuttered factories, riders and investors faced the most personal reckoning of all. If you've made it this far, you know this story is bigger than Harley. It's about loyalty, legacy, and survival. So hit subscribe right now, because when the next brand stumbles, you'll want to see it before the headlines twist it. Your ride, your legacy. This isn't just Harley's story, it's your wallet, your town, your legacy. For riders, the collapse of the Pan America project and the retreat from innovation mean fewer choices, higher prices, and the loss of a cultural touchstone. For communities, every shuttered dealership represents lost jobs, quieter streets, and fading traditions. For investors, Harley's fall is a warning that no brand is too iconic to fail when it forgets its foundation. The lesson stretches far beyond motorcycles. Every industry is entering a period of accelerated change. Electric cars, artificial intelligence, streaming media, globalized supply chains. Brands that cling to past glories without honoring the communities that sustain them will face the same backlash Harley did. And when trust breaks, it rarely returns. The story of Harley's canceled Pan America 1250 is not just about one bike. It is about the fragile bond between corporations and the people who give them meaning. Riders, workers, and consumers everywhere now know the truth. Loyalty is earned, not inherited. The roar may have gone silent, but the warning it leaves behind echoes loudly for all to hear. Because if Harley can fall, then no legacy, no matter how strong, can ever assume it is safe. Harley's collapse isn't just about motorcycles. It's about what happens when legacy brands forget the people who built them. If this hit you, don't just scroll away. Smash that like button to push this story further, drop your take in the comments, and most importantly, subscribe right now. Because Harley won't be the last icon to stumble, and the next one could hit closer to your wallet, your job, or your town. Stay ready. The next chapter starts here.